Hi, welcome to another session of International Business. And today's topic is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, that is UNCTAD, was established in 1964 as a permanent intergovernmental body. So basically, the discussions happens between the governments through this organization. UNCTAD is the part of United Nations Secretariat dealing with trade, investment, and development issues. The organization's goals are: 1. To maximize the trade, investment, and development opportunities of developing countries. So, it is an organization of developing countries for developing countries, and it assists them in their efforts to integrate into the world economy on an equitable basis. UNCTAD was established by the United Nations General Assembly in 1964, and it reports to the United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Economic and Social Council. The World Trade Organization signifies the reality of the globalization of the economy. So, in an interplay of trade and commerce in a global village, World Trade Organization may be said to be the referee. So, economies, small, medium, and big, all have a role to play, each important in its own way in shaping the global economy for the prosperity of all the nations. It was created for the liberalization of international trade, and it came into existence on January 1995 as the successor to General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs. World Trade Organizations deal with the rules of trade between nations at a global level. It is responsible for implementing new trade agreements. All the member countries have to follow the trade agreement as decided by the Trade Organization, and UNCTAD being the one of the part of it. Now, working at the national, regional, and global level, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development keeps that efforts to help the countries: 1. To comprehend options to address macro level developmental changes, then 2. Achieve beneficial integration into the international trading system. 3. Diversify economies to make them less dependent on commodities. Next, limit their exposure to financial volatility and debt. Attract investment and make it more development friendly. The next is increase access to digital technologies. UNCTAD helps in promoting entrepreneurship and innovation as well. United Nations Conference on Trade and Development helps local firms move up value chains. It also speeds up the flow of goods across borders. It also protects consumers from abuse. It curbs regulations that stifle competition, and it adapts to climate change and use natural resources more effectively. Now, the primary objective of United Nations Conference on Trade and Development is to formulate policies relating to all the aspects of development, including trade, aid, transport, finance, and technology. The conference ordinarily meets once in 4 years. The permanent secretariat is in Geneva. One of the principal achievements of UNCTAD, that was established in 1964, has been to conceive and implement the Generalized System of Preferences, that is GSP. It was argued in UNCTAD that to promote exports of manufactured goods from developing countries, it would be necessary to offer special tariff concessions to such exports. Accepting this argument, the developed countries formulated the Generalized System of Preferences scheme, under which manufacturers, exports, and import of some agricultural goods from the developing countries enter duty free or at reduced rates in the developed countries. Since imports of such items from other developed countries are subject to the normal rates of duties, imports of the same items from developing countries would enjoy a competitive advantage. The creation of UNCTAD in 1964 was based on concerns of developing countries over the international market, multinational corporations, and great disparity between developed nations and developing nations. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development was established to provide a forum where the developing countries could discuss the problems relating to their economic development. The organization grew from the view that existing institutions like General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, that has now been replaced by World Trade Organization, or International Monetary Fund, that is IMF, and World Bank, are not properly organized to handle the particular problems of developing countries. Later, in 1970s and 80s, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development was closely associated with the idea of New International Economic Order, that is NIEO. The first UNCTAD conference took place in Geneva in 1964. The second was in New Delhi in India in 1968. The third was in Santiago in 1972. The next one was in Nairobi in 1976. The fifth in Manila in 1979. The sixth in Belgrade in 1983. Seventh in Geneva again in 1987. And eighth in Cartagena in 1992. Ninth at Johannesburg in 1996. 10th in Bangkok, Thailand in 2000. 11th in Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2004, and 12th in Accra in 2008. The 13th was in Doha, Qatar in 2012, and 14th was again in Nairobi, Kenya in 2016. Currently, UNCTAD has 195 member states and is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. UNCTAD has 400 staff members and a biannual regular budget of $138 million in core expenditures and $72 million in extra budgetary technical assistance funds. It is a member of United Nations Development Group. There are non-governmental organizations participating in the activities of a United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. About its membership, as of May 2018, 195 states are UNCTAD members. All UN members plus United Nations observer states like Palestine and Holy See, UNCTAD members are divided into 4 lists, the division being based on United Nations regional groups with 6 members unassigned, that is Armenia, Kiribati, Nauru, South Sudan, Tajikistan, Tuvalu. List A contains mostly of the countries in the African and Asia Pacific groups of United Nations. List B consists of countries of the Western European and other group. List C consists of countries of group of Latin American and Caribbean states, that is GRULAC. List D consists of countries of Eastern Europe group. The lists, originally defined in 19th General Assembly Resolution 1995, serve to balance geographical distribution of member states, representation on Trade Development Board, and other United Nations Conference on Trade and Development structures. The lists are similar to those of UNIDO and an unspecialized agency. The most recent member of UNCTAD is Palestine. Intergovernment work is done at five level of meetings. The UNCTAD conference that is held every 4 years. The UNCTAD Trade and Development Board, the board manages the work of UNCTAD between two conferences and meets up to 3 times every year. 4. UNCTAD commissions and one working party. These meet more than the board to take up policy program and budgetary issues. Expert meetings. The commissions will convene expert meetings on selected topics to provide substantive and expert input for commission policy discussions. The 15th quadrennial meeting is scheduled to take place in Bridgetown, Barbados from 25th to 30th April 2021. About the meetings, the first was held in Geneva in 1964, and in response to developing country, that is the least developed country LDCs, anxiety at their worsening position in world trade, the United Nations General Assembly voted for one off conference. These early discussions paved the way for new International Monetary Fund facilities to provide finance for shortfalls in commodity earnings and for the generalized preference schemes, which increased access to northern markets for manufactured imports from the south. At Geneva, the least developed countries were successful in the proposal for the conference, with its secretariat to become a permanent organ of the United Nations, with meetings every 4 years. At the Geneva meeting, Raul Pebish, a prominent Argentinian economist from the United Nations Economic Commission on Latin America and Caribbean, that is ECLA, became the organization's first Secretary General. The second UNCTAD meeting was held in New Delhi in 1968. The New Delhi conference, held in February and March 1968, was a forum that allowed developing countries to reach agreement on the basic principles of their development policies. The conference in New Delhi was an opportunity for scheme to be finally approved. The conference provided a major impetus in persuading the North to follow up UNCTAD resolutions in establishing generalized preferences. The target for private and official flows to least developing countries was raised to 1% of the North's GNP, but the developed countries failed to commit themselves to achieving the target by a specific date. This has proven a continuing point of debate of UNCTAD conferences. The conference led to the International Sugar Agreement, which seeks to stabilize world sugar prices. The next meeting was held in Santiago in 1972. The Santiago Conference was held on 15th April 1972 and was the third occasion on which the developing countries have confronted the rich with the need to use trade and aid measures more effectively to improve living standards in the developing world. Discussion centered on the international monetary system and specifically on the South proposal that a higher proportion of new special drawing rights should be allocated to least developing countries as a form of aid. In Santiago, substantial disagreements arose within the group of 77, that is known as G77. Despite pre-conference meetings, there was disagreement over special drawing rights proposal, and between those in the that was basically in Latin American countries, who wanted G77, who wanted fundamental changes such as change in voting allocations in the South's favor at the International Monetary Fund, and those basically the Latin American countries who wanted much milder reforms. This internal dissent seriously weakened the group's negotiating position and led to a final agreed motion which recommended that IMF should examine the link and that further research be conducted into general reforms. This avoided firm commitments to act on the link or general reform, and the motion was passed by the conference. The next one happened in Nairobi in 1976 and the Manila in 1979. So UNCT 84 was held in Nairobi. 76 showed relative success compared to its predecessors. An Overseas Development Institute briefing paper of April 1979 highlights one reason for success as being down to the 1973 oil crisis and the encouragement of least developing countries to make gains through producers of other commodities. The principal result of the conference was the adoption of the integrated program for commodities. The program covered the principal commodity exports and its objectives aside from the stabilization of commodity prices. That were just and remunerative pricing taking into account world inflation. The expansion of processing, distribution, and control of technology by least developing countries, and improved access to the markets. UNCT 85 in the wake of Nairobi conference held in Manila in 1979 focused on the key issue of protectionism in developing countries and the need for structural changes in trade, in commodities and manufacturers, and in international monetary reforms, technology, shipping, and economic cooperation among developing countries. An Overseas Development Institute briefing paper written in 1979 focuses its attention on the key issues regarding the least developed countries' role as the group of 77 in the international community. The next meeting was held in Belgrade in 1983. That was the sixth United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. It was held in Belgrade from 6 to 30th June 1983 and was held against the background earlier UNCTADs, which have substantially failed to resolve many of the disagreements between the developed and developing countries and of a world economy in its worst recession since the early 30s. The key issues of the time were finance and adjustment, commodity price stabilization, and trade. The Bridgetown, Barbados 2021, the 15th session of UNCTAD was originally scheduled in 2020 but was delayed until 2021 because of the COVID-19. Now, this is the first time that the UNCTAD is held in a small island developing states, that is SIDS. So, what all reports does UNCTAD produces? The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development produces a number of topical reports, including the Trade and Development Report, the Trade and Environment Review, World Investment Report, Economic Development in Africa Report, the Least Developed Countries Report, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development Statistics, Digital Economy Report, also known as Information Economy Report, the Review of Maritime Transport, the International Accounting and Reporting Issues Annual Review, and the Technology and Innovation. United Nations Conference on Trade and Development conducts technical cooperation programs such as SESUDA, DMFAs, Empretec, and VIPA. In addition, UNCTAD conducts certain technical cooperation and collaboration with the World Trade Organization through the Joint International Trade Center, that is ITC, a technical cooperation agency targeting operational and enterprise-oriented aspects of trade development. UNCTAD hosts the Intergovernmental Working Group of Experts on International Standards of Accounting and Reporting. The statistics of UNCTAD. Reliable statistical information, that is statistics and indicators used in analysis of international trade, investment and development, is indispensable for the formulation of sound economic policies and recommendations. This, in turn, is essential for fostering social and economic development. UNCTAD compiles, validates, and processes a wide range of data collected from national and international sources. Most time series data cover extended periods of time, with some dating back to 1948 for almost all the economies of the world. This allows the analysis of emerging and urgent issues within a framework of long lasting tendencies and wide geographical scope. In case of missing data or break in series, UNCTAD applies its expertise and methodology to make estimates. Such continuity, together with accurateness and timeliness, are the pillars of UNCTAD statistics. The UNCTAD statistics are grounded in continuity, accuracy, and timeliness. UNCTAD statistical work also conforms to the United Nations principles governing international statistical activities, formulated with significant contributions from United States. It's supported by the UNCTAD Statistics Quality Assurance Framework. UNCTAD produces more than 150 indicators in statistical time series essential for the analysis of international trade, economic trends, foreign direct investment, extra financial resources, population and labor force, commodities, the information economy, and maritime transport. United Nations Conference on Trade and Development report on India tells that India is the world's ninth largest recipient of the foreign direct investment in 2019, scoring deals worth 51 billion US dollars, according to a report by United Nations trade body, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, that is UNCTAD. Foreign direct investment into India may decline sharply in 2020 because of the impact of coronavirus pandemic and the consequent lockdown measures, supply chain disruptions, and economic slowdown, even as foreign direct investment inflows to Asia's third largest economy jumped from 20% to $51 billion in 2019, according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. So, out of the reports, this is what the UNCTAD reports tell us about India's situation. So, you can prepare a UNCTAD short note for your examination. These are the references. Thank you for listening.